Hello, everyone. Should we start? Yes. We only have 1 hour. I think it's better that we start on time. So welcome, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. We are starting the launch of Gender and Peacebuilding, Local Practices in Indonesia and Nigeria, the latest special issue of International Development Policy Journal. This is an event that is co-organized between the journal and the Gender Center. And I am Graziella Moraes Silva, professor of sociology and one of the editors of the journal, and will be the moderator of this launch today. It's really a pleasure to see this issue, and sometimes we call it special issue, sometimes we call it the book, but it's just great to see it come to life as I have followed the project quite closely. I was in the author's workshop and I could see the improvements, and I'm sure those who had the chance to read it are really going to enjoy it. This is not only an original contribution to debate about peace building through gender lenses, but also a result of a long collaboration among researchers from Indonesia, Nigeria, and Switzerland, some of which are here today with us. As we do not have much time, I will let the speakers tell you more about the project. But before introducing them, I would like to just mention that the Gender and Peace Building issue is available to read and download for free in the Open Edition Journal website, as well as the Institute's website of the journal. And you can also get a printed version ordered through Braille. For those of you who are not familiar with the journal, the International Development Policy is a peer-reviewed, open access journal that promotes cutting-edge research on global development policies. The journal also organizes conferences and debates like this one between scholars, policymakers, and practitioners on key development policy issues based on the various themes of our articles and special issues. If you have not done so, I would really encourage you to visit our policy debate website, which brings together videos of our conferences, interviews with our authors, and articles tackling some interesting issues surrounding international development policy and more. You actually find many interviews, video interviews with the authors of this issue. And I should also say that the event today is being recorded and will be later posted at our website. So today we are delighted to have 4 speakers: Elizabeth Frugo, Wenning Udas Moro, Joy Onieso, and Elizabeth Mezok. And I will introduce each of them as I give them the mic, so you can know who is talking. In terms of the logistics, the idea is to keep the presentations relatively short so we can have more time for the Q&A. And you can submit your questions on the Q&A chat, and we'll be reading it to the speakers. So did I say everything that I had to say, I know, or do you want to add anything more in terms of logistics?
Yeah, we are good, I think.
Okay, great. So I will start then introducing my colleague, Elizabeth Frugo, who I think most of you already know. She's a professor here at the International Relations and Political Science Department, and she's one of the editors and also one of the authors of this issue. Lisa has published extensively on issues including atypical forms of women's labor and their international regulation, the new liberalization of feminism, and on gender expertise in international governments. She has too many publications and academic achievements, and reading them all would basically take all the time of our webinar. But I will mention that she received the Eminent Scholar Award of the Feminist Theory and Gender Studies section on the International Studies Association, ISA, in 2019. Lisa, the screen is yours, and congratulations on the new issue.
Thank you so much, Graziella. Thanks for the kind introduction, and also thank you to DevPol for publishing the results of our research. I'm really pleased that we are here right now. This book is the result of a 7-year research project on gender and conflict that involved a partnership of researchers from Switzerland, Indonesia, and Nigeria. It was funded by the Swiss program for research on global issues for development, the R4D program, and we're very, very grateful to have had the privilege of that funding, which has made possible a really, really exciting range of activities, research, and now we hope also findings. This particular book pertains to one module of the project, and in that module we pursued the research question: how does gender operate in peace building, and to what effect? In order to answer that question, we assumed explicitly a feminist methodology. In other words, this means three things. It means that we looked at peace building from the bottom up. In other words, we were not interested in the way in which the United Nations peacekeeping operations include women in their activities. Rather, we actually picked two countries, Indonesia and Nigeria, which never saw any United Nations peacekeeping activities, persuaded that there is a lot of peace building going on in local communities in those countries. Furthermore, we put those at the margins to the center of our inquiry, and that meant specifically looking at women's activities and of the activities those not typically in the center of attention. And finally, we explicitly tried to be reflexive about the way in which we conducted ourselves in our research, about the power relationships that suffuse any North-South collaboration, but also about what fell out of our research and what sometimes we inadvertently excluded. And there are in the book two short pieces, we call them interludes, that address precisely these issues. They reflect on how we dealt with power in the research process, and and one specifically addresses the way in which sexual and gender-based violence inadvertently dropped out of our view, even though it kept popping up in our research. So there is a sense of reflecting of how that happened and how problematic it is that that happened. But the core message of the book is that we need to think about gender in peace building as more than including women. It means, for one, that we recognize everyday peace building activities, recognize and document the abundance of such activities in various communities, and that we also value what local understandings are of peace. And we have a chapter in the book on the Niger Delta, where Jaren Bulldog, who I see here also, is reviewing such meanings, including how crucial for the people there the issue of economic development is when they are thinking about peace, in addition to other elements that also appear in the literature, and she discusses that against each other. We have another chapter on East Java, where we argue, and this is Winning Udas Moro and myself, that peace is sometimes agonistic, that it needs activism, that it needs opposition, and this is in a context of land grabs. A second set of findings in the book pertain to understanding the power of gender in these activities, gender as an obstacle sometimes, and gender relations and gender structures as an obstacle to peace building, but gender structures also as a resource and gender identities as a resource for peace building. So, for example, we show how gender relations became an obstacle because of the way in which they limit what women and men can do. For example, in the case of Aceh, where the demobilization of former female combatants actually entailed a sense of disempowerment, even though they were very interested in entering into politics. The gendered arrangements within the GAM itself made this very difficult, and they reinvented themselves as peace builders outside the formal structures as a result. But we also have cases where we show that gender became a resource for activism. For example, again in East Java, we found protest movements actually putting women into the front and women going into the front of activism precisely in order to prevent violence on the part of security forces. And Joy is going to talk in a minute about the Umwada again, where a gendered social organization that becomes a source for peace building in southeastern Nigeria. We also show how identity constructions not only become a resource in the way in which they exist, but how sometimes it's actually the disruption of these identity constructions that becomes a creative way of doing peace building. And Wenning is going to talk about some of these in the Art for Peace movement in Indonesia in just a minute. Finally, the book also shows how through gender expertise and international programming, gender is being sometimes re-stereotyped, but also made more fluid when international programs, often in collaboration with local communities, implement gender programs. And Christelle Rigal has a very interesting article about a project in Maluku documenting this. In these various ways, we argue that gender exercises power in peace building, making certain things possible and making other things impossible. I will stop here and yield the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Lisa, for this great introduction. I really encourage you to read the introduction that is actually co-written by the editors. And I think it gives a very interesting conceptual framework to read all those articles and put them together in a very interesting way. So now we will continue with Professor Wenning Udasmoro, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, who is another editor and also one of the authors of this volume. She actually, I think, has two pieces. She's Professor of Literature and Gender at Universitas Gadjah Mada in Jakarta, Indonesia. She received her PhD in Gender Studies from our neighbor, University of Geneva, in 2006. Her main research interests are gender issues, literature, violence, identity politics, and critical discourses analysis. One of her latest works is Gender Dynamics of Labor Force Participation in Insurgency and Ethno-Religious Conflicts, the Cases of Ace and Bon, International Feminist Journal of Politics. Wenning, the screen and the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Graziella. I would like also thanks Development Policy Journal for publishing, for having published our book. Thank you everyone for being here in this forum. So I'm representing a researcher from Indonesia. There is also Arifah Rahmawati here in this forum. So later on, if you have questions, you can also answer your questions. So in the book, we talk about different cases related to peace building in Indonesia. Just mentioned already by Lisa, there are several articles about Indonesia. For instance, articles on Aceh women combatant in Bali. Also article, this article was written by Arifah. And then article on land grab protest, a woman protest in East Java. and also Art for Peace in Ambon. So there are 3 different areas in Indonesia that we wrote in this article, in this book. So because I have limited time, so I will introduce only one of the chapter of the book written by Rahel Kunz and myself about Art for Peace. So why talking about Art for Peace in Indonesian context? During the conflict, the horizontal ethno-religious conflict in Ambon, conflict between Christian, Muslims, or Ambonese and non-Ambonese. So what is the contribution of our articles to the debate of feminist literature? So when we talk about the relation between arts and peace building, we see that many scholars have written about the importance, for instance, of arts for trauma healing or arts to transform conflict into peace building. And also when we talk about the articles on Indonesia about arts, a lot of scholars have written about how art have been used by many political regimes to preserve their power. Suharto era, for instance, for 30 years of his power, he used arts. He used shadow puppet to preserve his power. But other things also, arts have been also used by Indonesian people to resist against the power of the state. So here, however, there is less attention given to the dynamics of arts and intersectional perspective through gender lenses when talking about arts and peace. So the main purpose of our article is to bring into feminist literature the intersectional dynamics of everyday peace building and the art-based peace building. So we focus on the context of Ambon through one of the examples of how youth community of arts called Paparisa Ambon Bergerak, who creates initiative to maintain peace in Ambon. So Ambon having experience of ethno-religious conflict 20 years ago, there are more 5,000 people died, not more than 2 years at a time. So here we use intersectional reading as a method to allow us to critically read arts, and we read arts as an open-ended politics, which means that arts, according to us, is not a stable, we don't use a stable interpretation. So we use here intersection of gender, class, race, religions as important aspect in reading arts as an approach to peace. So here we look at 2 dimensions. The first one, we look at how gender, religion, ethnic, and class are mobilized in arts for peace initiative. So we see how Paparisa Ambon Bergerak uses differences of religions, ethnic groups, social class, gender to create initiative, overcoming violence, and building bridge for inclusive peace. So Paparisa Ambon Bergerak here has been able, according to us, to mobilize youth from different backgrounds to work together through arts to preserve peace in Ambon. And the second one, we analyze how arts for peace initiative transform also gender relation. Most of youth active in Paparisa Ambon Bergerak were before the perpetrators and also the actors of conflict, but how they transform their violent masculinities into non-violent masculinities through their arts initiative. So this analysis show how Arts for Peace initiative can challenge the intersectional power relation and also bridges differences. So we see arts as the instruments, and the intersectional dynamics can mobilize, transform, visibilize power relations. So here we use different material, object, combination of data visual, literature, such as poem, artwork, painting, etc., in order to understand how this initiative works. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wani, and I really hope that in the Q&A we can talk more about the different ways in which in the volume you discuss intersectionality, because I think it's very interesting and go beyond the usual ways that we discuss it. So next, we are going to hear from Joy Onyeso, who is also one of the editors and authors of this volume. Unfortunately, Joy could not be here with us live, so she Mezok Foundation, which is dedicated to building resilient communities in Nigeria, an experienced activist, facilitator, organizer, trainer, and researcher. Joy's consultancy and research interests lie in the area of gender and development, with a focus on women, peace, and security. She has written a doctoral dissertation at the California Institute of Integral Studies on women's transformative leadership in conflict and post-conflict societies. I know if you can now play Joy's video, it would be great. It's a shame that we could not have Joy with us live, but it's at least nice to hear her. And I also encourage you to read her chapter. And now, last but definitely not least, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Elizabeth Mezok, who was not an author or editor of the volume, but who was the reviewer of the online authors workshop that we had for this volume, and whose comments certainly improved this final version. So Elizabeth is an SNF Prima grantee at the Center for Gender Studies at the University of Basel, where she leads a 5-year project looking at how gender matters within the global counterterrorism security architecture, known as the Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism Agenda. She completed her PhD in American Studies in 2013 and her MA in Politics in 2007, both from the New York University. From 2013 and 15, she was a postdoctoral fellow in Global American Studies at Harvard University. And she has also taught courses on gender, peace, and security in the Department of Political Science at the University of Basel and in the Department of Political Science and International Relations here at the Institute. Her publications can be found in the edit volumes Sexual Violence Against Men in Global Politics and Managing Sex in the US Military, and in the journals Radical History Review, Feminist Studies, and forthcoming in Critical Studies on Terrorism. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us, and please, the mic and the screen are yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been a delight to see the project from its early stages and to see a project reach its successful end. I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of its celebration as it launches into the world. So as mentioned, as the only one on the panel who was not a direct part of the project or an author in the book, I've been asked to just share some reflections or perhaps provocations based on my reading. And while I had the opportunity to review some of the chapters, obviously I can't speak to the book as a whole, but my comments are inspired by some of the theoretical and conceptual tensions that emerged for me and that are really discussed at length within the introduction. And so, what really struck me as I was reading this was the overwhelming difficulty, right, of conducting research and writing about concepts as slippery and malleable as both peacebuilding and gender. And this is obviously not a challenge that I am unfamiliar with, and I have great appreciation and respect for how the book attempts to capture the intersectional dimensions of gender with local iterations of peacebuilding practices and the ways in which it works to give space to the multiple attendant meanings of both the concept of gender and the concept of peacebuilding. And so in many ways, the book and the research that informs it seems to me to be an attempt to reclaim peacebuilding, as it were, away from a definition of peacebuilding only as informed by the neoliberal economic development practices of Western donor-led agendas, right, that really sits at the intersection of development, governance, and security. And this is done in the book by foregrounding the peacebuilding practices enacted by communities, even as they are, of course, engaging with and informed by international dynamics. So there is this tension, obviously, right, in research and writing about local peacebuilding practices that emerge both in reaction to, but are always, as I just said, informed by international and often neo-colonial agendas. And I think that this call, which was made by Cristal Regel in a different publication, right, and again here, to focus on the everydayness of peace-building practices enacted by communities is so incredibly necessary for a theorization of situated knowledge and intersectional gendered practices. But I would still query, however, and remember I was tasked with provocation, so I would query whether the intention of this focus on the everydayness of local peace-building practices is to reject or disrupt, right? Is it intended to disrupt the international liberal peace-building agenda, right, which is firmly rooted in these ideologies and practices of neoliberal economics and governance, or is it intended really to better inform it? And for me, the urgency of this question was really well captured in Regel's piece, Cristal's piece, on the 3 dimensions of gender mainstreaming in economic peace building and the neoliberal framings of peace and security, and in particular, her exploration of how the preventing and countering violent extremism agenda instrumentalizes women as resources for peace through these economic programs and development programs intended to foster women's empowerment, gender equality, right, which are seen as in and of themselves tools to prevent violent extremism, although that's based in little to no evidence. And I think here, right, the PCVE agenda has unquestionably transformed and continues to transform the peace-building landscape and further entrenching it within the development and security regimes, and doing so by deploying these gendered tactics of managing populations. And yet, at the same time, right, because you have the PCVE agenda as this sort of the big thing, and then also the everydayness of violence prevention, of conflict transformation that is enacted by local peace builders, even as it's within this larger discursive and funding framework of PCVE. So it's a similar tension that I'm seeing. And you know, at the end of Cristal's chapter, she writes, she queries whether, or she writes that small-scale transformations perceived as positive by women are underway, but multiple and overlapping challenges will remain as long as projects continue to equate gender with women and to impose neocolonial and neoliberal market-oriented economic models for peace building. But my question is really, can peace building ever exist outside of such models? And if so, is there a better discursive framing, right, that we can use for it? And this brings me back to the 4 gender logics that were offered as heuristic tools, I thought quite helpfully. So these 4 logics, the structuring logic of gender, the identity logic of gender, gender as a resource for activism, and gender as governmentality, are really helpful for thinking about how gender is embodied and lived, challenged and negotiated with, but also harnessed and deployed by these power regimes. And so there's a reference to Butler's concept of performativity, but I think what might have been missed is not just the way that performativity is about identity formation, but about subjectivity and the constitution of political subjects, some whom are deemed intelligible, right, and whose lives are deemed livable and grievable, right, in the language of Butler. And so I think there's an important connection to be made to between the identity logic of gender, which is rightly pointed out, is never fully determinate and is always negotiated with, right, and agentively by individuals, and the logic of gender as governmentality. And I think this latter point, which is again well illustrated by Regel's chapter, works to produce these normative and essentialist constructions of women, gender, equality, and empowerment. I would argue specifically to develop and govern sites of conflict within the global South. So I won't say much else, but I hope some of this is provocative. And I would just end by pointing to the last sentence of the introduction, which reads, attempts to manage conflict and build peace would do well to recognize the force of gender and harness it to their ends. And so I would ask back to maybe the authors or to anyone interested in this topic, right? Who are we calling on, you know, to recognize the force of gender and to harness it to what ends, right? So is the intention of turning to the local within peace building intended to transform peace building as enacted by international development and security regimes, or is it intended to reclaim it back from these spaces? So I know I'm over time, so I'm very, very sorry for that, but thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for the provocations. And also, thank you all the panelists for keeping on time, because that actually leaves us with 24 minutes for discussion. So I don't know if the authors want to react, but I see that Feneke already has her hand up for a question. So maybe we should collect a few reactions. Before giving the mic to Feneke, I would just add something that I would really like to hear from you also. Because one of the things that I really enjoy about this volume is how not only you push for a conceptual and sort of research-based type of analysis of how gender can contribute to better understand peace building, but you also reflect a lot on the research practices that you had with the interludes. And also maybe one thing, and it's a bit of a provocation also, what would you do different if you would restart the project now? What have you learned in this process? So Feneke, please go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody, and thank you and congratulations with this result. I join Elizabeth Mezok's words. Not been involved, but I've been on the edge and have been following this whole process over the last 7-8 years. I have a short question for the three of you. First of all, Lisa, you say that this is a project, and you showed it very well, that it is peace building bottom up in contrary to peace building top down. I was very curious to know how policymakers have received your research and if it is useful for policymakers, because if you go out and step out of the categories of policymakers, then very often it is more problematic for them than not. So I'm really curious if it is helpful the results are helpful for policymakers and to peace building in the regions. Then a short question for Wenning. I liked your presentation very much, Wenning, and happy to see you here. You're talking about art in Ambon, but it was a little bit abstract for me. Can you just elaborate a bit what kind of art? Is it plastic art? Is it sculptures? Is it music? Sort of, I couldn't catch that. And then I have a question for Joy, who is not here, but maybe some of the team members can reflect on that. The Umada is a community of first daughters. So supposedly it is first daughters or first wives in a polygamous environment. So what about the first daughters of second, third, and other wives? And I know for the Nigeria context that sometimes that is also a source of conflict, that only the first daughters of the first wife is there. And then also following on that, what about the second and more daughters in that region? I know from the Niger Delta in Nigeria, and especially there where, for example, Shell is very active, that in terms of inheritance, but that's more on the boys' side, that second, third boys for second and third wives are left behind in that sense. So these are my three short questions.
Thank you, Feneke. There's also a question on the chat from Kabu Abama. I think it's for Joy, but I don't know if one of the authors also would like to address it or discuss it, or if Cabo wants to unmute himself and ask something else, also feel free. Otherwise, I invite you to read the question in the chat box. So I give the mic back to the authors. I don't know who wants to go first. If some of the authors who have not spoken want to take the floor. How do you want to do this?
Can I maybe add on people?
Sure.
Oh, no, go on.
I'm wondering whether, Christelle, you would like to respond to Elizabeth's comments.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for giving me the floor and for yes, having this opportunity to to discuss with you all the content of this book. thank you also, Elizabeth, for the provocation and the attentive reading of the book and of the chapter. Very happy that it stimulates reflection. And indeed, I mean, you raised a couple of points that are really, like, as you said, tensions, right? And issues that we noted and that we try to explore and to unveil. Not having necessarily, you know, a purely defined solution to that. But you are right that, I mean, there is at least with this idea of this book and the project, a willingness to yes, to unveil and to highlight and to perhaps give back some power to some voices and some experiences and some expertise that are somehow yes, invisibilized in what we call, right, the international peace building framework. And usually these are the voices of the communities that are themselves affected by violence, because in the usual narratives on peace building, they are the ones that are somehow, quote unquote, problematic or violent, right? But thanks to this bottom-up approach that we had, we have been able to really connect with the communities that were affected by conflict and different subgroups within these communities, and to realize the level of involvement into trying to tame violence in their own groups. And these are the types of things that you cannot unlock, you cannot valorize, and you cannot support if you only have a very top-down approach to peace building. So in a way, yes, there is a sort of intention to focus on the everyday for this specific reason. Also because we have seen sometimes a mismatch between the architecture of some peace building efforts and the prevention of violent extremism is one good illustration of that, right? That is not harnessing the full potentials of the people upon which it is supposed to work, right? Because there is always this sort of external lens through the peace building landscape. Now, the second point on disrupting the liberal peace agenda, of course, that's I mean, the idea at least would be, it seems to me, to raise questions and to illustrate how it's not working, to show how it is so much external, how it is not connecting with the realities, how it is too much top-down and losing grounds with the voices of the population. And one thing that we are seeing as well is that even though there is a large efforts to integrate gender, to have mainstream gender, to have the women, peace and security agenda, and so on, we are still so much focusing on the woman that we are not exploring the gender logics, right? And I think that this is where the book is also doing a great work, is to look at the gender logic at play. Am I addressing some of the key issues that you raised? I think, and then I also remain available if someone wants support in responding to the questions, also for Joy's chapter if needed. But other than that, I think I will leave the floor for more questions and responses to the other authors.
Thank you,
Christelle. Lisa?
Yeah. Well, let me try on. There seems to be a subtext in several of these questions about the relationship to Fenneke formulated as how have policymakers received your research, and I think Elizabeth was saying, well, who are you still calling on here when you say that the force of gender needs to be harnessed and so on? You know, is it the policymakers, or is it you know, disrupting from the bottom up? I mean, one of the interesting things, let me put it this way, for me as an academic who doesn't usually talk all that much about to policy people, in the R4D project, was specifically that it required us to actually talk to policy people. We were supposed to have practical knowledge that was supposed to be generated from the project, and there was efforts to communicate those to policy people. That had certain implications. It had implications for the way in which we did our research, because we had, first of all, we actually had people in the research team that were activists and that wanted to talk to policy people. So there is that element of having somebody to call on and recommendations to give was always there. Now, who that person was, or who our addressee was, kind of changed, because for ourselves, when we were working on the grounds, and I'm wondering whether Arifa wants to talk about this a little bit, we actually worked a lot with local activists, and very often the project itself became activist in what we were doing, and even funded some things such as, for example, contributions to a local museum in Aceh, commemorating remembering the work of the Inong Bale, for example. So we did that, but on the other hand, R4D and the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency wanted us to talk to them and the people that they were working with, and policy people more broadly. Now, the experience obviously varied with depending on who we talked to there. From one extreme, like I said, the collaboration actually with people who were active in a practical space. On the other hand, we had a very interesting experience just a few months ago, talking at an event at the International Peace Force, or Swiss Int, whatever that stands for, but the Swiss military involved in international peace activities. And that was an entirely different experience, not because of the military that much really, but because of gender experts and people working in the gender and policy space there. And they just kept coming back to wanting to get more women into the military. And that's all they could hear when we were talking. Now, we haven't talked about the military at all, right? But somehow the whole event just got retranslated into an entirely different message. I found that really, really frustrating. And yeah, so yeah, these conversations are very, very complicated. Let me just say one thing also about the Umuada, and I'm a little worried about the question in the chat, because I know very little about Nigeria, and I'm probably gonna get myself into trouble. However, on Fenike's question, as the first daughters and wives and so on, there's of course this big discussion in Africa as to whether there are women, right? Whether the category women even makes sense. And I'm thinking of Oyebumi's book about the invention of women in West Africa. And so we come in, and that discourse internationally comes in, that yes, women exist and women are supposed to be doing all kinds of things. What I think is really interesting about the Umuada is that it's specific. It doesn't talk, in a sense, it doesn't talk about women, it talks about first daughters. And yes, first daughters are not second daughters, and daughters are not wives, right? I mean, that's really important in terms of the position a woman holds within a family. the daughter is often on the Umuara. I mean, there's stories that Choi also talked about where the Umuara kind of keep the wives, you know, in check so that they do what they're supposed to be doing, and they're treating the man well and things of that nature. So it's a complicated institution, but what's fascinating about it is, like Choi says, you know, they do male things. They are political, they solve problems, they sometimes have the last word on certain conflicts when conflict resolution has to happen. And, you know, they are now kind of, we had this one workshop where we had this really super interesting discussion where somebody suggested, well, the Umaro really need to turn themselves into an NGO so that they can come, so that they can gain funding from all these agencies, and others were saying, no, you can't do that because then it's not an Umuara any longer, you know, that just becomes a very different thing. So it's a very interesting kind of hybrid institution that has power clearly and can be harnessed, here I go again, for peace building activities. Now, who does the harnessing and who not, is kind of an open-ended question, and I'm not going to answer it. But Arifa, did you want to talk about museums or your activism locally?
Okay, I think I will take about 2 minutes talking about the activism in Aceh and how it connects to the peace building and with the government policy actually. As maybe some of you know that in Aceh there is a peace museum developed by the local government to show people how the conflict start and then how they end the conflict, something like that. But as our research found that actually women play quite important role in creating involved in conflict as well as to make peace in Aceh. But when we entered the museum, we saw that no single women activism there. So then we talked to them that actually this history is not really correct because you don't involve women in it. So it became a kind of very nice argument. And then finally, they realized that somehow they only see men in the history. So finally, at the end, they also put women. They place a picture of women, especially the Inong Bale, or the female combatant who involved in the conflict, as well as they also then put some specific place where we provide some books to show that actually some document to show that actually women really involved both in conflict and peace in Aceh. So I think somehow our research can give input to the local government to change their what you call their activities as well as their written history in Aceh especially. So I think there's a very simple thing on the ground, but actually it happened during our project. Not only doing research, but also we give back the information, the result of our research to the government so that they can correct their history or they can change the policy of the local government. This maybe this Lisa?
Yes, thank you, Arifa. I'm wondering, Wenning, you had a question about which art, yes. And I'm wondering whether you want to tackle Graziella's question.
Thank you very much, Fenike, for the question. Yeah, I forget to tell what kind of art. But before, it is very important to see also that the youth were fragmented into different groups of religion and also ethnic groups. And also they were separated geographically. Because before they were lived together, Muslim and Christian, but after the conflict, they separated into Christian and Muslim, and also they're separated ideologically because they really have after the conflict different ideologies about what is religion, for instance. So they think, the youth think that this is more dangerous when they live spiritually. So one of the instruments to put them together is through arts, not sports, because sports sometimes also create conflict. For instance, they fight sometimes because of football competition, so they use art. So they have different arts. Usually Ambonese people, they like singing. It's very well known in Indonesia, they like singing, so they use some music, and also they use paintings, exhibition of paintings, and also writing poems. So they create also poems after the conflict as a way to show that they want to live together again like before the conflict. So there are so many arts they created after the conflict. So this Paparese Ambon Bergerak was created around 6 years after the conflict.
And you don't want to talk about what we would have done differently?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the important aspect that maybe for the next for the next research also, we now we think of, or we wrote about the micro level, but we didn't write about the meso level and the macro level. I think it's also important to see how the military, they will see the conflict, because now they have changing of the way they see conflict in Indonesia, with the changes of hierarchies in the military. It is, I think, very important to see also how we connect, we dialogue also with the Indonesian military. Yeah, this is one of the thing, and also the institutions. We don't have a lot of dialogue also with international organizations outside Indonesia. That I think they have also a lot of things they do during the conflict, yeah, in Aceh and also in Ambon, for instance, and we do not have yet this conversation with these international organizations. Yeah, these two things I think will be very good for the next research.
Thank you, Winnie. I don't know if Lisa or any of the authors want to say anything else, but we are slowly getting to the end of our lunch. It's already been 1 hour, believe it or not. So I'm hoping through these words of Winnie that there's might going to be some continuation of this partnership, and maybe a part 2 on the book, focusing on different things. I would also like to say that this is just hopefully the first of different meetings that we're going to have about the special issue. Hopefully next one, COVID allowing, we might have with some 3-dimension type of interaction. So we'll keep you posted. Also want to say that Kabu's question on the chat, I just got his email, sorry, his or her email, and I'm going to forward it to Joy. And what else do I need to say? I think that's, I'm just going to use the last minute to also say, please, I really, really encourage you to download the chapters or the whole volume from the open source or from the Institute's website, and also watch the videos that are very, very nice that are posted on our website. So thank you, everybody, and we'll keep you posted on the next events of this special issue / book, Gender in Peacebuilding. And hope to see you soon. Have a good end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Bye.